Carlos, you brought up a moment ago the issue of globalization. Now, we know that we live in a globalized marketplace, and so people encounter cultural symbols in brands from different places. So can there ever be any negative response from consumers to the cultural symbolism in a brand?
That's an excellent question. And that's actually a relatively new phenomenon. With globalization, what we're finding now is that cultures are getting closer and cultures are being integrated sometimes. Part of my research and some of my colleagues, trying to understand what are the psychological consequences of that, how people respond to that. But definitely, there can be positives and negatives. And particularly when we think about the notion of culture mixing or the integration of cultures in the same place at the same time. And we've seen that. And what happens is that sometimes this cultural mixing can have a very negative response, what we call exclusionary responses. People respond to that as, this is not right. You're like contaminating the culture. Or it can be the opposite, people that perceive that the mixing of cultures is something creative and innovative. And there is a variety of factors that influence that. But just to give you an example, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, Budweiser was acquired by the big Belgian company InBev. And that's something that's happening quite often now, that we see brands being acquired by other brands. Chrysler was bought by Fiat. And whenever this iconic brands, if we think Budweiser, for instance, is a very strong American icon, when we think about this brand being acquired by a foreign entity, then is the brand still American? All of a sudden, what you have there is a mixing of the cultures, an American brand, but owned by a foreign entity that then becomes a bicultural kind of situation or culture mixing. And some people reacted very negatively to that, and people thought, we need to boycott Budweiser because now Budweiser is not anymore an American brand. But some people really don't mind. And if you think one of the biggest trends in cuisine right now is what we call fusion food. Fusion food, by definition, is a mixing of cultures. And then there are some fusion restaurants that are very popular. And fusion food, for some people, is very attractive. But there is some other people that think that idea of cooking something traditional in a different way is wrong. Like you're contaminating the culture. So there are personal factors that influence this. And there are also situational factors that influence this. But definitely we see that globalization is bringing cultural issues to the forefront and thinking when and why people will respond favorably or negatively to cultural stimuli in the marketplace is becoming an important topic.
Now, marketers also often want to leverage the equity of their brands through brand extensions. Now, what does this mean for marketers of culturally iconic brands?
That's, again, a very good question. The whole idea of brand leveraging, it's very common. More and more companies are realizing that they have invested significant resources in their brands and they want to leverage this investment and transfer that equity to other products. If we think that's a relatively old phenomenon, but now it's very pervasive. If you think, for instance, movies or books, it's really hard to think now about very successful movies or books that don't have a saga. And that's an extension. You're trying to leverage the equity that you built in an idea or in a story, and then leverage that further in multiple versions of it. So the same is happening, for products. Many companies are doing that. As companies are doing this, then they sometimes, without thinking about it, are venturing into cultural domains. Sometimes they do it, I would argue, implicitly. Sometimes it kind of makes sense. But sometimes they see an opportunity and they go in a direction that seems attractive, but they don't think in cultural terms, and that can have very strong consequences. So let me give you a couple of examples. One example is Budweiser barbecue sauce. Well, if you think about it, Budweiser barbecue sauce doesn't make too much sense, but there is something in the back of your mind that says, well, it kind of doesn't make too much sense, but doesn't sound bad. It sounds right. Is Budweiser well-trained to make barbecue sauce? Probably not. Budweiser is an alcohol beverage company. What do they know about making barbecue sauce? So there's no technical expertise to do this. But there is something that still says, well, but what is it that connects Budweiser with barbecue sauce? Then one connection is that both are American icons. What's more American than grilling and barbecuing? That's something that we do, tailgating on, during summer. Budweiser is also an American icon. So there is this connection in the back of the mind of the consumer in which American culture as a network of associations has both Budweiser and barbecuing or grilling. And then all of a sudden Budweiser barbecue sauce makes sense. Although from many other perspectives, doesn't make sense. If you think about the 4 Ps, couldn't be more different. But let's take another example. Budweiser recently is connected to a brand, to a tequila flavor version of beer. It's called Oculto. And when you think about a tequila flavor beer by Budweiser, all of a sudden what you get is this first thing like, wait a second, what's going on there? Well, in one hand, this is alcoholic beverage, like tequila flavor beer, kind of relatively, you could argue, makes sense. But there's something in the back of your mind that tells you, oh, but that sounds a little bit gross. There's something wrong with that. And what is that something wrong? Well, that again, Budweiser is something that's very American. And then you have tequila, which is Mexican. And then you are mixing American and Mexican cultural frames. And all of a sudden, there is an initial negative response. So as a marketer, being aware that that happens, then you need to try to overcome that response because actually it could be an interesting product. And I'm not sure how well that beer is doing, but definitely there is a reason to promote that type of product.
And that's an interesting example that you give because Budweiser also had a margarita flavored beer line that came out a few years ago. And recently when I was at the supermarket, I saw it, but I noticed that the Budweiser name had been removed, and now it just says Rita's margarita, sparkling water or something like that. I can't remember what exactly, but they removed the Budweiser from it. I wasn't sure if it was the same product still. The marketer in me was curious, so I picked up the package and looked at it, and sure enough, very, very tiny print. It said St. Louis, Missouri, and the Anheuser-Busch company. So it was indeed still the same product, just had been, disassociated from the brand. And I'm sure that helped boost sales to remove that cultural clash in the minds of consumers.
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent example. And actually, the Oculto is associated with Budweiser, but Budweiser is not in the label. And one of the things with culture mixing is that one way to attenuate it is just to try to dampen a little bit the cultural symbolism in the product. And because the Budweiser brand is the very strong cultural symbol, then by removing that from the as being as the protagonist in the label, then you minimize. You still might have Budweiser kind of in the background endorsing it, or sometimes you just hide it in the back completely. But that notion of culture mixing and being aware of it is something that is becoming more common.